Thank you, Marika, for the kind introduction. Most basins worldwide are dominated by vertical hydrocarbon migration. This migration is recognized in seismic data as zones of chaotic, often low amplitude seismic reflectivity called gas chimneys, mud volcanoes, or gas clouds based on their morphology. Today we'll just lump them into the term chimney, even though they could be related to either gas or oil migration. These features are associated with both oil and gas discoveries. Because of the diffuse character of these chimneys, they're difficult to visualize and map. Thus, DGB, in partnership with Statoil, now Equinor, developed a method to highlight these features in normally processed seismic data using a supervised neural network. The resultant chimney probability volume can be overlaid on seismic and displayed in 3 dimensions, and potentially show where the hydrocarbons originated from in either deep reservoirs or source rock intervals, how they migrated into shallow reservoirs, and then how they leak from these reservoirs to form shallow seepage. Combining these chimney geobodies with reservoir porosity volumes or geobodies from AVO or seismic inversion, we can better understand the petroleum system and really look at both vertical and lateral migration. Why are we going to do this? It really is to visualize the whole petroleum system. In places there are shallow production that we can identify deep prospects. And we can also identify potential seals, effective seals, and breach traps. In many cases, we can actually determine from which stratigraphic interval the chimneys are originating and thus infer expulsion from source rock. Only with this technology can we actually visualize hydrocarbon migration related to faulting. By overlaying on either time, depth, or horizon slices, we can take the fault data, maybe a thin fault likelihood attribute or fault probability volumes here in grayscales, and overlay on that the chimney probability results with high probabilities here in red. Again, with large chimneys, such as we see in the back area, these are easy to see in seismic data. But what we don't see very clearly are these chimneys related to, in this case, shear along a fault, and being able to distinguish both migrating hydrocarbon faults and faults that are sealing. The other thing we can actually do is determine by taking a mapped fault surface and overlaying on that the chimney data, we can actually see what parts of the fault are migrating hydrocarbons, in this case in areas where there's bends in the fault and areas that are not migrating hydrocarbons. We can sometimes visualize that in 3 dimensions and relate it to pockmarks at the seabed. This example from Nigeria had oil piston cores at the surface. The main reason we want to do this type of work is to assess vertical, top seal, and charge risk. A recent study of 20 major exploration companies by Schlumberger assessed the cause of exploration failure. They found that seal and charge were the main causes of dry holes. Chimney analysis addresses both of these risks. With advances in seismic imaging over the last decade, we have made great strides in defining the trap and potential reservoir. Indeed, over 90% of the papers at recent EAG and SEG conferences addressed these topics. However, very few addressed top seal or charge. AVO has been an important tool in delineating prospective reservoirs, yet we can have a strong AVO and frequency attenuation response over a breached trap. Statoil, Hägglund with Statoil, has developed a trap classification based on work primarily in the North Sea. He looked at 100 traps in the North Sea and found that traps with no chimneys had less than a 50% success rate. Traps with chimneys, it was above 80%, and if you use this trap classification, it was over 90%. And again, what he found is very successful was these Class B or Class C traps, which had an overlying gas cloud or flank leakage. We have taken, based on our experience, we have modified the Statoil model. While the Statoil model focused on chimneys above the reservoir because they were focused on the North Sea where a lot of times the source rock is embedded or above the reservoir, we also looked at chimneys below the reservoir. Thus, we add a fourth class, what we call a top seal trap, to this classification. The crestal leak trap, which leaks via fault or point source chimney, is the highest risk. However, it does work 27% of the time, generally if the trap is being recharged at the present. Flank leak traps are very common and provide critical information concerning the most likely hydrocarbon column height. While very often containing hydrocarbons, they may not be economically successful if the column height is not sufficient. Top seal traps, in contrast, are generally high integrity traps and often filled to spill. The other thing we address with chimneys is vertical hydrocarbon charge risk. And what we're trying to do here is really look at the quantity of chimneys in immediate contact with the trap or reservoir. And where the chimneys are directly below the trap or clearly linked via the reservoir to the trap, we have a very high success rate. Where the chimneys are less extensive or not clearly linked to the reservoir, that's where we have this charge risk trap, which has a higher risk of failure. And most of the traps we've looked at have had chimneys in the immediate vicinity. So we have limited data to really address that, what we call no chimney trap. Now, how do we detect these gas chimneys? Individual multi-trace attributes can be used to see these chimneys, but they are not unique. Thus, we need to create a meta-attribute using a supervised neural network to visualize the chimneys or other geologic objects such as a reservoir or salt more clearly. By supervised neural network, we mean that the interpreter is picking examples of chimneys or non-chimneys and guiding the end result. The software, of course, we use is OpendTect with the dip steering and neural network plugin. The first step in the workflow is to find the most reliable chimneys in the 2D or 3D volume. Often we will look for chimneys which are linked to shallow DHIs or surface seepage, and we can use the vertical discontinuity attribute as a guide. On these key lines, we will then pick representative train locations, chimney yes in green or chimney no in blue. You want to pick the most obvious chimneys and use the vertical discontinuity attribute as a guide. The other thing you would do is pick non-chimneys, and generally you would like to do that in faults, debris flows, salt, where vertical migration is not indicated. Once you have a representative set of these chimney no and chimney yes, you would calculate a set of attributes at those locations. And there is a default chimney attribute set that we start out with, and then you can modify that based on the area. sometimes including increasing the windows or adding other attributes. We would then feed that data into a neural network and train. Again, here we will set apart a test data set, maybe 20%, and what we want to see is something on the range of maybe 10 to 15% misclassifications. If the number of misclassifications is smaller than that, then you may have more of a yes-no answer, and it doesn't reflect the uncertainty in your interpretation. In the neural network processing, the most important attributes in the processing will show up as orange to red. Once we are satisfied with the results, we can apply that neural network to the data. And when we feel like it is matching the interpreter's insight, then we would apply it to the whole volume. And at that point, we can then visualize the results in 3 dimensions. Now, not every vertical discontinuity or high probability chimney in the seismic data represents hydrocarbon migration. Thus, a very important step is to validate the results. And the first question we need to understand is whether the chimney is related to fluid flow or just poor seismic images. We have 3 criteria that we really look at in this case. First of all, is there consistency between the near and far offset data to eliminate the possibility of seismic artifacts. The other thing we look at is the pockmarked morphology on time slices or horizon slices. If the discontinuity is related just to poor imaging, we would see a more random distribution of discontinuities. The other thing we can look at is geomechanical modeling and see if the preferential chimney direction is related to shear or critically stressed faulting. The second question we really want to ask is this due to hydrocarbon migration? And again, here we can link the chimneys to shallow DHIs, to seepage indications of oil or gas migration based on either surface geochemistry or piston core data. We can also link it to results in basin models, and the best result is from actual wells that drill through these chimneys to see if we see an increase in C2 through C5 and oftentimes an increase in pressure in a well. Now, consistency between basin modeling and chimney results is especially critical because they are totally independent views of hydrocarbon migration, and when they are similar, they validate each other. Once we've determined that a chimney is reliable, we can then create a 3D geobody of that reliable chimney and display it in relationship to any sort of reservoir geobody that we've been able to define. Now, one thing I've discovered is that the neural network results tend to be fairly optimistic. And a lot of times we would use a cutoff of 80 or 90% to represent what I would say valid or reliable chimneys. We will now show the main interpretation techniques that we use in evaluating prospects. And here we're going to use the Mari oil field from our chimney atlas as an example. The first thing we must do is display the chimney results at key reservoir objective horizons. We can then see where the main chimneys are that are possibly charging or leaking from the structure, and we can create seismic lines that go through these critical chimneys and also through the wells. We can then, on these key seismic lines, show the work with uninterpreted, so you can see the seismic character of the chimney, and include with the well data any sort of oil, gas shows, or in the case, electric log information if you have it. We can then show the line interpreted. Now, to evaluate hydrocarbon charge, we want to show, one good way of doing this is to show a horizon slice 200 milliseconds below the objective horizon. And that will show chimneys that are potentially charging the reservoir. In this case, we have this chimney number 1 is right under the Mari structure. We've displayed in black the reservoirs that are sort of the thickest part of the reservoirs, but we know from the well data that these reservoirs extend over the structure. So again, this chimney 1 and maybe chimney 2 as well, providing lateral charge into the structure. To understand top seal risk, we then can show a horizon slice 200 milliseconds above the objective horizon. In this case, the chimney number 1 has pretty much died out, indicating that there is effective charge into the reservoir, and also that there's a defective top seal. And what we do see is on the flanks of the structure, we see these chimneys which are on the flank, and thus we can determine that this is a flank leak trap, and that the most likely column, the most likely water hydrocarbon break is at that dashed black line. This has been corroborated by the well data where it shows that the Moki 2A well was drilled a wet sand at this stratigraphic interval. Finally, we can display reliable chimneys in a 3D with known or suspected oil field reservoirs, here shown in green, or gas field reservoirs in red. One thing that's very useful is to make the objective horizon semi-transparent, so chimneys above and below the objective can be distinguished. Where has this technology been used successfully? We've done a number of studies in the South Atlantic margin, both tertiary and Mesozoic plays. The technique is especially useful in the Cretaceous deep water play, where we've observed widespread chimneys originating from a Cenomanian Turonian source rock, which charges upper Cretaceous deep water fans and channel complexes. Recent giant oil discoveries have been made in this play. We've also done a number of studies in the offshore Australia, both in the Gippsland and Northwest Shelf, where seal effectiveness has been determined to be a major risk based on post-well studies. Another place, of course, is the North Sea and the Gulf of Mexico, where we've done a number of projects both onshore, offshore, and in deep water. The one place this technology is probably not as applicable is in the subsalt, where it is often difficult to image properly these chimneys. Where is this technology going? Currently, we are investigating the potential of deep learning convolutional neural networks, which use pattern recognition to detect chimneys. These algorithms may be applied to multiple seismic data sets, which is a limitation right now of these shallow neural networks. We are also using geomechanical modeling of gas chimneys to get a better understanding of their morphology. We currently have a worldwide public database of chimney case studies over a number of known discoveries and dry holes. These examples provide analogs. However, we need more examples. It's especially useful over known dry holes which drilled effective structural traps and contained effective reservoir. Confidential well log information is not necessary to analyze these wells, although show information and pressure data is useful. For more information on this technology, I refer you to the SEG Geophysical Developments number 16, which has a number of good papers, both from DGB as well as Equinor and other companies. And thank you for watching, and I'm available now for questions.